So I'm just going to say a few words about tithe maps and how we're best going to incorporate them in our review of the footpaths and rights of way here in Devon. First thing I think to be said is that we're quite fortunate here because they're already all online, very easy to review, and the actual job of doing a sort of side-by-side review of a tithe map versus a modern day map is really, parish by parish. It doesn't take long at all, just because the tithe maps, they were made back in the 1830s, and the level of detail is such that you can cast your eye over it and get the idea quite quickly of whether or not there's something useful or not there. So they make an easy check, and I'll just quickly give you the details. Basically, these maps, it was the infancy of mapping in Britain, sort of civil mapping, good quality mapping. I mean, I suppose you'd have the enclosure awards earlier, but this was when things were getting people were beginning to focus very carefully on the land, and the reason in this case was that for about 1,000 years. We'd been paying 1/10 of our income of every plot of land to the church, and with the advent of new Christian groups and people were starting to trade their rights to tithes, and things were getting complicated. So the government decided to formalise things and just assign every plot of land a value, a monetary value that would take the place of that tithe payment, just to make things simple, essentially. And as such, it was in the landowner's interest to make it very clear where there was a right of way or any parcel of land that was not productive. Because if you could say, hey, this area is not productive, then the whole value would come down and you'd have a little bit less to pay to the local church or whoever represented them. And it's worth saying that these were really serious documents in their time, very based on the Tithe Act 1836, which was a carefully drafted piece of legislation setting out very careful checks and balances and all kinds of arrangements for commissioners to review things, with serious punishments incurred if people were untrue. So this was a heavyweight legal operation in the time, and following on from the idea that once a highway, always a highway, which is the key legal judgment on rights of way. If a highway is shown in these maps, then it's good evidence that it was a highway in some regard. One thing I'd say is that as you review these, let's try not to get too carried away, because when you submit an application to register a lost right of way today, the people reviewing it are tasked with reviewing the whole of the evidence. As such, a tithe map, it often provides additional weight. It will rarely provide the linchpin, the big piece of evidence that shows that there is a lost path in a certain location. But it's part of the picture, and as such, it deserves a review, and if it can support an application, it deserves to be in the application. When the actual work of making an application, all that's involved is a screenshot and a description, and using the pro forma descriptions in the Bucks and Wadey textbook, chapter 3.6. So it's all pretty low effort, really, in terms of adding a useful tithe section to an application. Now, one of the problems we have with tithe maps is that they don't have a uniform key to them. Okay, so they just show, roads, or generally a road is in a slightly darker brown colour, but they don't have a specific key saying this is a footpath, this is a bridleway, which means again that their evidence value becomes indicative and not conclusive. So it's supportive, in other words. But that said, it's pretty simple where it's very easy to see where there is a road, or even sometimes footpaths are marked in little dotted lines, which I'll get to in a second when I review a couple of these. Now you've got the Tithe Maps, and when you look at the maps you'll see these tiny little numbers over every little section of the land. These refer to a description in a separate document called the apportionments, which helpfully are also online. So it's very easy just to click over to the apportionments and check what exactly the description was. And there's a couple of things to look out for. For example, if the apportionment number states that a road is listed as being in the ownership and occupation of the surveyor of highways, that's a good indication. It's very good evidence that it's a public highway and that it's of public highway status. And another thing to look out for is where you have occasionally these indications on the Tithe Map of where the road goes after it leaves the parish, and it will say to this place from that place, and it's generally viewed as unlikely that would have been written on roads that were not for public use. So where it says from here to there, generally that will mean that's a public stretch of highway. And just to return to that point of apportionments, one of the good tricks you can do, let's say you've got a Tithe Map showing two roads with separate numbers but the same descriptions. So they both say, for example, the word road for two separate routes. And you know that one of these routes is a public road, then you can state in your application that it's likely that the drafting process of the Tithe Map was such that the other route was also a public road. Now, when you come to do your application, there really is no substitution to picking up a copy of the Bucks and Wadey textbook, which I'll put a link in the description. I promise this isn't an advert. The reason is that, I'm looking at page 80 at the moment, and you have a very clear methodology of writing up your Tithe Map. They break it open for you, and when it comes down the line to the time of writing these, you don't want to be scrabbling around and thinking, oh, what do I write here? What's important to write? I don't know. You want a good guide, and this is the good guide that you'll need. This textbook. And I think this could be the last point, but there is an issue of whether these maps are first class or second class maps. They introduced an amendment to the original legislation saying that certain maps would be deemed first class and certain would be deemed second class. For our purposes, it's really not relevant, because the only difference is that the second class map was deemed to be conclusive of matters relevant to the Tithe Commissioner's work, i.e. setting out a scheme of the value of the land, rather than actually making an accurate map. However, when you have a road, even if it's a second class map, it's most likely going to appear there and be relevant to the value of the land, and therefore first class or second class. It should appear, and it should have meaning and relevance to the map and what it says about the value of the land. So don't get too bogged down on whether it's a sealed first class tithe map or a second class tithe map. And again, the Buxton Wadey textbook has some appropriate drafting to guide you through stating what exactly, what kind of map it is. It's very easy to find out whether it's first or second class. You just search on the National Archives. I'll put another link in the description for that. Do a quick search, and it will say this is a first class map, and so you can do that as well. You can enter that it's a first class map as well, which ultimately may sway the more kind of may sway inspectors when they review this, when they review the applications. Well, so now let's do a quick example of how to actually apply the tithe maps to this task. Don't lose your way, I'm on the Ramblers website. Abbots Bakington, alphabetically first parish in Devon. So let's have a look. We've got a path here. Quickly, let's visit the old mapping. And you can see why someone's marked it. Nice little FP there. Footpath. So at some point it was a footpath, and then you look at today's mapping, and there is no right of way shown, so it's disappeared. Could be a candidate. You never know. So we want to visit the tithe map for Abbots Bakington, which is here, Abbots Bakington. And, well, you want to have a look at it. Here we are. Here is the village. There's the church, and you can see there's absolutely no sign that a path came down, or any right of way came down here. These sort of sepia, these browny roads, obviously they're roads, and we can see there's just nothing like it. So that would mean that you're not going to use tithe maps to prove anything about this section here. Interestingly, so anyway, let's move, and you can have and you will just repeat this, really. You'll just repeat this for every time that you see a blue dotted line. You want to just check, dial it up, find it, check if there is a right of way on the tithe map. I'm going to go along this road here on the tithe maps, and interestingly, there's a little route going north here. I look on the current day map. Well, it's a little white lane, but it peters out quite quickly. And so, but this, we're starting with the Ramblers Don't Use Your Way data. We're not starting with this data here, the tithe map data. So, you wouldn't use this to claim a right of way, though. You could try, and you could try and look for enclosure map evidence and railway mapping evidence. You could look for all sorts of evidence to see if there's any other anything else to back up this pretty clear sort of route going through here. But there's nothing there. There's nothing there for our purposes. When you look at the modern day mapping here, zoom in, you can have a quick check and have a look at the old maps here. Yeah, there's just nothing. There's a little bit of, there's a footpath here apparently, but it's already been transferred to the modern rights of way network. So, but my point is this, let's say this route here there was evidence for a tithe map, and you get your route on the site where it should have been. The main lesson is the fact that we can't overreach ourselves. You know, all these tithe maps show are that there were rights of way, and when the adjudicator reviews it, they will look at it and say, okay, yeah, something's there. It's absolutely not definitive, but it does contribute to the picture. It corroborates something, and so they'll just make a note and move on. And I would say also, you know, as I described earlier, these aren't footpaths, these aren't bridleways. We don't know what these are. So how do you deal with it when you make your application? Well, on Bucks and Wadey, they just describe them as public vehicular rights of way. You know, they basically just describe them as something is here. And again, I would just say, if you have a tithe map route where backing up a route on a different map, which we don't in this case, but if you do, then you would just follow the wording in Bucks and Wadey, and it would all be grist to the mill. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Thank you.